So welcome everyone. My name's Isla and I am the Campaigns Officer for Our Bright Future. I'm joined today by my colleague Kaye Brennan, who is the Head of Campaigns for Wildlife Trust. If you could give us a wave, Kaye, that would be great. So in this webinar, you're going to hear all about campaigning with some great insight and expertise from the Wildlife Trust. And the aims of this session for you to get to know our campaigning work, and you'll have an opportunity to share your ideas and experience, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll feel inspired to become campaign champions. So I'll just run through a bit of housekeeping before we get properly into the webinar. This session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on screen, do please stop your video. And if you are staying on video, just make sure there's no one else included in the background who might not want to be. And if you can, keep yourselves on mute when you're not speaking, just so it reduces the background noise, that would be great. Do feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat at any time, though. My helpful facilitators, so that's Kath, Roberta, and Lydia. If you guys give us a wave, they're all going to be keeping an eye on the chat for me. So we'll aim to answer questions during the session if we can, but if there's anything we don't have time for, we'll aim to pick that up afterwards. So I imagine most of you here are familiar with either Our Bright Future or the Wildlife Trust, if not both, but I'll give you a quick introduction to each anyway. So Our Bright Future is an ambitious and innovative partnership led by the Wildlife Trust, funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, which brings together the youth and environmental sectors. And there are 31 varied Our Bright Future projects all around the UK, which all help young people to gain skills and experience and enable young people to deliver change for their local environment and communities. The Our Bright Future programme has 3 policy asks or changes that we want to see happen, which were developed by young people that were involved in the programme. These focus on more time spent learning in and about the environment, on access to environmental jobs, and also on young voices being heard. I don't know if you're able to see my cursor at all, but that is the ask on the right of the screen there. And when we say young voices heard, that means by policymakers, by businesses, charities, so on. So that's the ask that's really relevant to what we're going to be talking about today as regards campaigning. Wildlife Trust, well, we are a grassroots movement that believe we need nature and it needs us. We've got more than 850,000 members and 35,000 volunteers working together with their Wildlife Trust to make their local area wilder and make nature a part of life for everyone. We've got more than a century of experience of protecting and caring for wildlife and wild places. So there are actually 46 individual wildlife trusts that are all independent charities, but collectively under the Wildlife Trust umbrella, we're able to have a strong voice on national issues and national campaigns. So I will now hand over to Kaye to tell us a bit more about the Trust's campaigning work.
Thanks, Isla. I'm just going to turn my video off a second because my internet's been really bad. But hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So as Isla said, campaigning is very much what we want to be able to talk about. And campaigning is a fairly new function for the Wildlife Trust. There's only been a campaigns resource at the central team for the last 2 years when the movement-wide Wilder Future campaign was launched. I joined last August to pick this up, and since July of this year, we've been joined by Isla, which has been brilliant. So today, the Wildlife Trust have over 100,000 active campaigners taking action with us, though. So what we've been doing for that last year and a half has been pretty effective, which we're really pleased about. And campaigning is a really important way that we can see those policy asks that Isla showed you become normal in our everyday lives. And we've all been working really hard behind the scenes to make sure there's buy-in from people like the Environment Agency and ministers on recognising how important those asks are. But it'll be through campaigning that we'll see them turn into reality. And there are many different methods that you can use to campaign, and some of these actually you might be familiar with. Things like emailing targets, so maybe emailing your MP or writing to your MP to ask them to do something on your behalf, signing petitions, being part of a march or a demonstration, like maybe the school strikes or Black Lives Matter marches, and using the media to get your message across is also something that you might be familiar with. But it's not really a defined thing. Basically, when you're campaigning, you're trying to influence the person or the people that can make the change that you want to see. You need to convince them that they also want what you want, and you need to help convince them why it's not a good idea to do whatever it is that they're doing that you don't want them to do. A good friend of mine once explained campaigning to me as starting little fires. And I remember that, it was a long time ago, but I always remembered it because I really liked the idea of that. I sort of influencing one step at a time, starting a little fire over here, starting a little fire over here, and at some point you build and build and build. Campaigning is ultimately about working in an organised and active way towards a particular goal. Typically it's a political or a social one. The two pictures that you can see here on the screen give a little bit of an example of the kind of thing that I mean. On the left, you can see Wildlife Trust supporters attending a climate march, which some of you might have also done in the past. Being part of a march or a demonstration like this really helps to show a massive public support for action on climate change. It backs up a bigger message that I know that you're well aware of for the need for genuine political action to tackle climate change. The other picture is a group of chief executives from 5 of the wildlife trusts that are affected by HS2. There are 14 actually wildlife trusts that are affected by the whole route. And this picture shows them outside number 10 Downing Street after they have handed in a letter to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson asking him to rethink HS2 in light of evidence that we've collected of the risks to nature. The Wildlife Trusts have been challenging HS2 since the very beginning, so a good 10 years now that we've been campaigning around HS2. And in February this year, we ran an active campaign to get people to countersign that letter for us. And more than 65,000 people joined in with that. And campaigning doesn't have to always be negative or opposing something. You can also obviously help change happen by being positive about what you do want to see or what you'd like to see more of. And the Wildlife Trust like to take that more of a tactic, so we like to be more constructive in what we're doing. So for example, you could write to your council to thank them for not cutting the grass in sections of your local park, for example. Or you could use the media to highlight how well something's going, and so more people get to hear about it and will support it as well. And you can respond to, say, a consultation in favour of something as well. But actually, quick ask for those of you that are on the call as well, especially young people on the call, use the chat and tell us about the sort of campaign that you've done before. So post in the chat any ways that you've been working to see a change happen or how you've tried to influence someone to do something for nature. If you haven't got an example that relates to nature, that's okay. It'd be really good to know what sort of campaigning you've been up to yourself. So please do use the chat while I still go through a couple more slides. And I can tell you that as a collective, we do prefer to take more of a positive and constructive approach to influencing. The Wildlife Trusts like to help by offering advice and sharing our experiences. We don't tend to be the kind of organisation that says a blanket no to something, although those organisations can be really effective too. One of the unique things though about us as a movement is that wildlife trusts are doers. We work on our own land and we work with others' lands to show them how things can change, and we like to offer alternative ideas rather than just saying no to something. There's a balance there because obviously we only know about nature, of course. What we don't know about nature isn't worth knowing, I don't think, at the moment, so it's pretty good. And it does mean that when we do pose an argument, we always back it up with evidence, research and science to tell that story or to make an argument. Now, it does mean, obviously, I suppose, that not all our campaigns are crazy fun. They're not all very sexy, but we are effective, especially because we represent so many people on the ground. We also know, hearing from politicians and so on, that because we don't spend a lot of time campaigning negatively, or we don't sort of wind people up with petitions that don't get anywhere all the time, that when the Wildlife Trusts do have something to say, they tend to be listened to, which I find really incredibly helpful, especially in my first year. It's a really great thing to think that, you take your time to find the right message, but when we get that right, we are listened to. It's really important for us to tell the right people what we need for nature in the right way. And one of the best ways to do that is when there's a public consultation about something. And that brings me to our current live campaign, which is all about trying to influence a specific thing that the government's responsible for. And I want to show you how this works in practice. So actually, I can't see all of you in the chat on the Zoom, but I think you might have a thumbs up option or a raise your hand option, but you might just also just wave. But raise your hand or wave at us if you've ever been involved in planning in your local area. Use the thumbs up or the chat to let us know. Anyone done anything around planning before? Okay, I can see a couple of thumbs up and a couple of waves. That's really good to see that some of you have had some experience of being involved. I often get involved in planning in my community. I think I'm the only person that actually notices planning notices occasionally, but I'm not surprised there wasn't every single hand up, because planning can be quite dull, and those of you that have been involved, I'm sure it hasn't been the most fascinating activity for you, and it can really be fairly complicated as well. But we do know from research that the majority of people who do get involved in planning locally, they get involved towards the end of the process, which is usually when decisions have been practically made already. A good example of this is when you see maybe a tree being chopped down near you or a woodland area being cleared close to where you live. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that, unfortunately. Now, that's been suggested for a reason, sometimes to make way for a new housing estate, for example, and that's already been agreed to happen and it's been given permission. By the time you see it happening, by the time those chainsaws come, it's way too late to influence that decision. The planning system basically is what decides what sort of buildings will be in an area, including houses, and where they'll be built. It also defines how some things should be protected, like natural spaces, and how decisions should be made and what developers who build those houses and office blocks and so on have to do when they're drawing up their plans, and what they have to do when they're actually building to protect special places or to make a development greener, like linking it up to existing pathways or parks, for example. Now, we know that nature needs to be given more priority in planning. I know that you've seen in the media recently and probably all around you how poor a state nature is right now. And we know that it needs to be given more priority in planning because planning isn't obviously working very well for nature. And I bet you'd agree with that as well. The planning system really should be about protecting our beautiful green spaces and enabling wildlife to thrive, but it's really not. So the Wildlife Trust were really happy when we heard that there would be changes to the system in England. The changes are set out in the government's planning white paper. A white paper is a consultation document. It normally sort of sets the direction of travel that the government is thinking about. And this white paper is called Planning for the Future. It's the best route to influence what the government's suggesting should be changed in the planning system. But I have to tell you that we've looked really closely at the changes in the white paper in a lot of depth, and the Wildlife Trust are really very worried. The changes as they stand will only make a bad situation much worse. We're really concerned that they're actually going to fail nature, fail people, and definitely fail local democracy too. And as they stand, the changes that the government's put forward also fail to address climate change, the nature emergency that we're in, and growing health inequalities. Now, we believe they need some underpinning principles to help set them on the right track. Otherwise, they'll just make a wilder future impossible. So our worries are based on the new changes, meaning there's actually potentially going to be more risk to nature. There's going to be less access to nature for people and communities, and there's definitely going to be a limited chance to have your say. Now, the government has framed this as a way that says, you know, we have great ambitions for planning. We really want planning to promote natural spaces. We want planning to make sure that people can access natural spaces, and we want planning to make sure that people can engage in the planning system as much as they want to. Unfortunately, that rhetoric and that messaging isn't really backed up with the consultation itself. And what we found is that we've got some major concerns around it. But as I was saying around what the Wildlife Trust prefers to take, the approach that we like to take is that we're finding ways that we can try and make that less damaging rather than just say we don't like it. And it's not really up to us as a wildlife organisation, a wildlife charity, what planning should be, because planning isn't just around nature. But of course, what we can do is put in a nature angle to this. So our analysis raises fundamental concerns around risks to nature access and the limited chance that you'll have to have your say about what happens in your community. But we've come up with 5 principles that we think should help ensure that instead Wildlife recovery and easy access to nature for people will be at the heart of reforms after all. We hope that their principles will also help existing protections and standards to make sure they're not weakened any further, so we get at least the baseline that we have now for protected areas. We definitely want to see ecological and climate crises addressed, and we're suggesting that we can protect land that's recovering, and we've suggested a wild belt to do that. And we also think that our principles will make sure that residents can engage at a stage and know the impacts on nature and communities as early on as possible, not at the end when the chainsaws come or you start to see cones put out on your street. We also think that our principles will really help decisions to be based on accurate data, and that data needs to be up to date. So what the government's suggesting could be made better, and that's where we're kind of coming at with this campaign. So we've set up a campaign action specifically around these planning changes that allows people to send a message straight into the consultation team. We want to make sure that everyone who does it can add in their own personal comments. The reason we want to make sure that personal comments are part of this is because the government has said very, very clearly they want to hear from individuals. What they mean by that is they don't really want petitions and people saying, I don't like this. They want to hear your actual views as local people. And so we've done our best to make sure that people can do exactly that. And what I'm showing you now on this screen is the web page of our action. So you can see it's just a screenshot of what it looks like, and this is about where you will live in the future, which is also why it's important that people can have their own say. So on the left of that picture you can see that we've set out our major concerns, and on the right hand side is a section where you can add in your thoughts too. When you go into the campaign action you'll see it scrolls down and there's more detail, and we've hidden some of it so it doesn't bog people down, but it's all available there for you to get more depth if you want to, or you can just go ahead and take action, do whatever you like. But as I said, our worries are based on these changes meaning more risk to nature, less access to nature, and limited chances for you to have your say. When you've read the campaign action and you sort of got the messaging that we've talked about, you can when you type in your thoughts, you'll then see the message that you're sending to the consultation, and that lets you check what you've said, and then you just sort of click send, and then gets it on its way straight to the consultation team. We've also made sure that anyone who takes part in this consultation action tells their local councillors, and we also want to make sure that they can help us by keeping some noise online by tweeting at MPs as well. This all makes a difference because it means that influencers like councillors can understand how many people who live in their area care about this too. What we want to make sure is that the consultation is responded to, but the people in power, especially at a local level, are the ones that know that you've done that, so they can then carry those messages forward into the future. And then just to show you what it looks like when you've done the action, everyone sees a thank you message that also encourages people to share things on social media, because social is really where we get the majority of our noise at the moment. And then we get a thank you email that we send out to you too. It's a really sneaky peek of what the action looks like for the planning changes, and a little bit of an idea about how the campaign action works behind the scenes. And I wanted to show you this one in particular, and we decided to do our webinar about this one in particular because it's so important that you take part in this especially. And why is that? Now, really, those of you that are involved in planning, you understand how it works. The planning system is what sets out what can be built where and the type of developments that will be created. That means the kind of community that you'll live in, what kind of neighbourhoods that you're going to be part of. And that means the places that you'll live, work, visit and relax in the future. And we all need a wilder future, and so nature needs to be part of this and really needs to be incorporated into planning as a system. But really those major worries that we've got mean that the reforms so far are going to be pretty rubbish if we can't sort them out. And if we can't allow you and enable you guys to have your say in it, then we'll never be able to make those changes that we need. Make sure that developments and housing estates and new schools and new towns and communities actually incorporate nature, and you have nature on your doorstep. It's really important that you can have a say in this while there's still a chance.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Kaye. So what we'd like to do now is head into some breakout rooms. So there's a chance for the young people here to talk to each other and share your ideas. For those of you that work with young people, so do please sort of share some of your experience too. So 2 key questions we'd like you to discuss. So firstly, when you take part in that campaign action that Kaye's just showed us. What do you think you could add to speak up for yourself and nature? So in that section where you can add your own views, what do you think is most important for you to say? And then secondly, how do you think you could help other young people to get involved in that campaign? So each room is going to have a facilitator, so that'll be Kaye, Kath, Roberta and Lydia, who will capture some key points from the discussion and feed that back to everyone. So I think we can spend probably about 15 or 20 minutes having those discussions. Totally up to you whether you want to talk or just type in the chat. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to see if I can sort out some breakout rooms now. Just to move a couple of people around as we've got slightly different numbers than anticipated, and then I will send you off. I hope you all had good discussions in your respective rooms. I think we're all back in the room now, so I'm going to ask the room facilitators to feed back one or two key points that came up in response to those two questions from each group. And while they're doing that, do feel free to write in the chat any points that you'd also like to particularly share back yourselves, just in case your room rep doesn't mention it. So Kaye, I'll start with you. Can you feed back a couple of points for each questions for your group?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So there were, I think, 5 or 6 of us all together, and one of the key things that definitely came through was what a route to be able to share this with other young people, especially through social. I mean, it's probably the most obvious, but a really good point was made around how different platforms that we use need to be able to have slightly different messaging, so you tailor the message to the platform that you're using. And for example, we talked a bit about Instagram versus say Twitter. You know, you wouldn't necessarily have the same message. You'd say something slightly different to kind of tailor things to the people that are using those platforms. I thought that was a really useful thing to think about. And I also explained a little bit more about that sort of local democracy side of things that the Wildlife Trust are most concerned about, because the idea that people can get more involved in local planning at the beginning of the process, but that could be 10 years before things actually happen in your neighbourhood. And one of the things that came up was that, you know, our generation don't stop at lampposts. You know, we don't necessarily spot that kind of thing, and we're also not necessarily going to want to get involved in something that we can't see an outcome to for several years later on. So it's definitely an issue that I think that I'm hoping that young people will be able to make to the government, because it is the one thing that the government has said that they're really pleased about in these plans, that they're helping to get people more involved earlier on. But actually in practice, it is a real worry to us that it just means that you won't have a say at all. And yeah, that was definitely something that we picked up. But for us, social's the way to get the message across, I think.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks for that, Kaye. Kath, I'll come to you next. How about your group?
So we were talking about the importance of thinking of local examples when responding to the consultation, and one of the ideas about networks was linking with university groups, and there's universities in most Wildlife Trust towns, so a really good opportunity to link with people there.
That's brilliant, really good point. Thanks, Kath. Lydia, how about your group?
So I went against the rules and I actually created a whiteboard in my group. So I could share it and put it on screen, and then everyone can read the points and I can talk through with you. Is that all right?
Yeah, yes, if you can talk me through anything I need to do on Zoom to make that happen.
I think I can share it and then I'll stop sharing and then it will just go back to yours. So it should be all right.
Go for it.
Okay, can you see my screen? Maybe.
At the moment, I'm still seeing mine.
Maybe not then. Maybe I'll just talk through them.
Is it because Isla's still sharing?
Yeah, Isla stopped sharing. I think then Lydia probably can.
Yeah, all right. I will take mine down and.
Oh, Alex is in
the chat. Alexander's got the tips in the chat. Thanks, Alex.
View options.
Sorry, I'm messing everyone around with adding in new things.
I can't see view options, Alexander.
It's okay.
Does that work?
It's okay.
Oh, so if everybody does that, you'll be able to see Lydia.
Yeah, I think we've got it.
Oh, that's, wow, you knew. Okay, so some people can see my screen and some people can't. So I'm going to read it out anyway. And then the people who aren't so sure, don't worry about it.
Thank you.
So we talked about stuff like, actually a lot of the points that Kaye just talked about. So like the long-term view and getting people to understand how early on you need people on board to make the changes and make the difference. When we talked about what we would like to include, say in consultational campaign, why is nature important to me, asking the questions, why nature should be protected for everyone, creating a personal connection with nature in the consultation, the longer term plans. And we talked about access to local park and green spaces. So is this within the plans? Like how much of a distance is there to someone living near a park? I really don't know that in the UK. Also public transport to nature spots to increase accessibility for young people, but those that actually can't afford to like drive, I don't know, 50 miles to their nearest national park. And then in the how do we help other young people part, we talked about potentially changing language to be a bit more self-explanatory. Planning reform is quite formal, and young people might be put off by that. Alex came up with a really good point of having a specific end goal to the campaign and having clearer benefits at the start so people will understand why they should get involved. We talked about training for young people in campaigning, different mediums, so sharing it on stuff like video, audio, VR and AR, and giving more accessibility in that way and showing people potentially what has happened because of planning and what could potentially happen with AR. That might be getting a bit high tech. And then keeping it local was also something that was shouted about, which Kaye talked about too.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. Loads of great points there. And I can see that James has popped a screenshot in the chat for those of us that haven't been able to see that as well. So thank you, James. Thank you, Lydia. That was brilliant. And yeah, great to hear all those points.
Hopefully everyone can see your screen now because I just stopped it.
Okay, great. Roberta, last but not least, how about your group?
Yes, so many of the points were already have been already covered so far. But in terms of like what do you want to tell the government, there were two key points. One is like a change that is affecting your local places. So Kat shared like a road proposal. So sharing some local examples of how the damaging some proposal could be. And so the importance, then the second point is the importance not to lose your voice. So what Laura said, in the 21st century, how can this happen in our community that we have not a say? So that was like a really strong point. In terms of like what is, how could you help the young people to get involved? It's about engaging with all the community to access nature, no matter where they live, and then also make it more accessible, like the language, unpacking the complexity of the decision making, and also Kirsty shared like her campaign with like a round period product. So reaching out to the community locally, engaging with the community in creative ways. And she will share the link in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's brilliant. Again, thanks, Roberta. Some common themes obviously coming up there around the importance of sort of local issues and everyone having the opportunity to sort of make their voice heard. So yeah, do post, as I said in the chat, if there's any other points from your group that you'd like to also raise, but we're coming towards the end of the session now, so I think we'll have a bit of a recap of what we've covered so far. So Kaye, I'm going to hand back over to you if that's all right, and you can do a final overview for us.
Thanks, Isla. I've turned my video off again, I think, because you're getting a bit weird. But hopefully you can hear me okay. So, I mean, yeah, a bit of a proper recap. And I appreciate everyone. This has been a whistle-stop tour from the Wildlife Trust, Our Bright Future, and this particular issue, which is a big deal. And we have got another 3 or 4 weeks to be able to get people involved in this and for you to have your say in this as well. What we didn't say, which I probably should have made really, really clear, but I would appreciate that you would recognise this, that the Wildlife Trust are not anti-development. And, you know, we're not against new housing, you know, we're not against the idea of progress at all. What we want is people to live with nature and to recognise that we are all part of nature. So it's not that we're saying, you know, we don't want any of this to happen ever. And we've not said that we don't want change. We do need a different way for the system to work. And we do want to see reforms or changes for sure. But we've got no confidence really. And that's quite a strong line for the Wildlife Trust to say. I know it doesn't feel like a very a strong word, but we've got no confidence at this stage that the changes that are proposed are actually going to protect or even enhance nature, and they're definitely not, as far as we can see, provide any sustainable development across neighbourhoods, towns or cities or countrysides in the whole area. None of it is really anything that we have a lot of confidence in, and as I say, that's quite a strong thing for the Wildlife Trust to say. As they stand, we really think they're going to make a bad situation worse. And I've said before about that idea of failing nature, failing people, failing especially local democracy. You know, I'm sure, because you've been involved in Wildlife Trust or Our Bright Future stuff in the past around, you know, our belief around nature's recovery, how important it is to have nature recover, not just to have, you know, new sites to be created and to protect the sites that we have got, but to actually increase the quality and the abundance of nature that we have. And that's what recovery kind of means to us. So to be able to have, you know, to be able to tackle and deal with climate change, nature's decline, and our massively growing health problems, they're all intertwined, they all impact and are affected and feed off each other, and nature's recovery is a massive part of that. So nature's recovery needs to be part of the planning changes too. And also, hopefully you've seen in the last few days the vision and the target the Wildlife Trust has put together, which the government also picked up, although not exactly as we were hoping, that we need to see at least 30% of our land and seas recovering across the UK by 2030, in the next 10 years, as a bare minimum. And when we say 30%, by the way, we don't just mean 30% of land that's protected, we mean 30% of land that's recovering. So protection's part of that, but connecting spaces, making green buildings, having green areas, street trees, all that kind of stuff, hedgerows, farm edges that are laid out for nature, all of that is part of recovery. And really for you guys, I suppose, the biggest thing that I think that I would really hope that you sort of take away from this is, and in my group, you said it, and probably in others it was also said, but the next generation, next generation of homeowners, the next generation of employees, of neighbours, the next generation of carers and volunteers and families, parents and brothers and sisters, it's really important to make sure that you can have your say now about what is going to happen and what will change while you have the chance, because when these reforms come in and these changes are made in the next year or so, this will probably become law, and the planning system will formally change based on this kind of consultation. That means that in 4 or 5 years' time, you'll be looking for the homes that have been built underneath that system, and that's why it's really important that you have the chance to speak up while you can. And from our perspective at Wildlife Trust and Our Bright Future, we would absolutely love it if you could think about the kind of stuff that we've just been talking about. How would you translate some of this wording into plain English for young people? How would you use the platforms that you've been telling me about in the last 20 minutes to get this kind of message out to your friends and your networks and other young people, and especially hard to reach young people and young people that within your communities who aren't into nature? I think we're very fortunate in a way, because we understand the importance of nature, because all of us, because we're part of this together, but a lot of people don't really see that, and they're not really sort of behind that message. And I think that you can really help us and Our Bright Future and the Wildlife Trust to get that across in the right way. You don't need to tell us what we need to change. You can change it yourself. You know, you can use that message yourself. So it'd be really great if you could help encourage more people to get involved in this campaign, especially, but in campaigning overall, but this campaign particularly, in the next few weeks as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Kaye. And as you said, I know that's quite a lot of information that has been shared in just under an hour today. So thank you firstly to Kaye for coming along and sharing her expertise with us, and thank you all for coming, and please do take part in the campaign action. It is so important for us to hear from those younger voices, and so the link is on the slide there, and I've also popped my email address at the bottom of the slide, so do feel free to drop me an email if you've got any questions, if there's anything that came up today that you'd like a bit more information about, or if there's anything you want to feed back from the session too. So yeah, thanks again, and hope to see you all taking part.
Thank you.